of course, today we're going to talk about Donald Trump being raided by the FBI, specifically his Mar-a-Lago property in Palm Beach, Florida, was raided by the FBI, allegedly for classified documents that he took with him when he vacated the White House in January 2021. A warrant has been released. The text of the warrant for this search was released a couple days ago. It said that he's under investigation for possible violations of the Espionage Act, for mishandling government documents, and possible obstruction of justice. We don't have a ton more information than what was in that warrant, but of course this has been a massive story, and we were not going to not talk about it today. Although it did happen about a week ago at this point, I think it's still worth chatting about with Ben today. It's unprecedented. I mean, no leader of a political party at this level. I mean, a person who was president less than 2 years ago, who was the de facto, and you could argue is still the de facto leader of the Republican Party, had his home raided by a DOJ that is controlled by the opposing party. That's obviously something that has raised tensions quite a lot. I have seen people go so far on the right on Twitter to say things like defund the FBI. That's kind of on the extreme end of the spectrum. And you had Kevin McCarthy saying that should he become Speaker of the House after the upcoming midterms, that he will massively increase the oversight over the FBI by the House Oversight Committee. So this is a major firestorm event. A lot of people feel that Trump is being politically persecuted. On the left, you have people saying no one is above the law. I personally don't think we have enough information to really go too far in either direction. But before I get more into my views on this, I wanted to ask Ben, because of course I have my new co-host who is also an attorney, and this is a very good week to have him for actually this and the other story we're going to talk about today, which was in Las Vegas. But I wanted to ask Ben, is there anything I was kind of missing in the basic description there, or any insight you want to provide as a lawyer?
So I don't think you missed anything. One thing that went around and round is like, we want to see the warrant. We want to see the warrant. And I actually am not that interested in seeing the warrant. I did look at it. But the warrant's one of 3 key documents in this process. So when officers want to search a place with a warrant, they first have to come up with what's called an application. It has to be an affidavit, and by the term affidavit, that just means it has to be sworn under penalties of perjury, under oath. That document is the one that lays out the case to a judge of what they think has happened and why they believe that a particular place will have evidence of whatever crime they think is being committed. That document's going to remain under seal until either of a couple things happen. One is charges are filed. Once charges are filed, that has to be released. Or the Department of Justice could release it out from under the seal. Now, you may ask, why is it under seal? Well, the federal government, unlike most state law enforcement agencies, the federal government investigates on the front end. So it's unlike, like, if your house got burglarized, Scott, and you call the police, well, they're going to be doing all that investigation after the fact. With federal investigations, the crimes are either ongoing, and they're going to do a ton of investigation on the front end. And sometimes they need to have searches on the front end. Well, if they release the affidavit leading up to the search warrants, then their target's going to know what the government is doing and why they are searching for what they're searching for. So as part of their investigative strategy, they keep those applications under seal so their targets don't get tipped off to what the government is up to. So the document release, we did see the warrant, and the warrant shows citations to 3 statutes in Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which is generally where you'll find crimes. There's crimes spread all over the U.S. Code, but that's generally the criminal code for for the federal government. And then also you saw in that in the documents I saw, you also saw the 3rd document. So the first is the affidavit, the second is the order, which is the warrant, and the third is the return. And the return says, what did we get? And so you saw this document of what all the FBI seized as part in their execution of the warrant. So those are of the 3 documents, we've seen 2 of them, and those are honestly the 2 least interesting ones.
I was going to say that first, the affidavit would really give us the insights that I think we all want. Those of us who are reserving our judgments until we get more information really want to know, what are they looking for? What do they think Trump did beyond perhaps mishandling these documents? Because Yeah, it was helpful. It was interesting to read what they seized. I mean, it seems like there was documents pertaining to Emmanuel Macron. Maybe there's some, I don't know, compromising information about Emmanuel. By the way, anyone who doesn't know this, look up the age difference between Emmanuel Macron and his wife. It's kind of an interesting little fun fact if you want to see something interesting. And you can also learn about how they met. It was actually a teacher-student relationship. But that's neither here nor there. But it did make me think that maybe there's something weird going on in these documents that, I don't know. I have a weird conspiracy theory that maybe Trump wanted to blackmail Emmanuel Macron, but I don't know. That's just a conspiracy theory on my part. But there was interesting stuff in there. There was also his letter pardoning Roger Stone. His order for that was seized. There was I think, unsubstantiated report that there may have been nuclear missile-related documents in there, but I don't think that was confirmed. That's seems kind of sensational, but I don't know. We'll see in the end. The thing is, people want to know, well, what did he really do? Like, yeah, you're investigating him for maybe mishandling these documents, and I guess maybe that falls under Espionage Act violations. But people want to know, like, is he trying to blackmail someone? Is he selling state secrets for profit? Is he maybe, using these documents to benefit his business or to benefit a potential campaign in 2024? Like, which, again, these are all potential allegations. I'm not making these allegations. I'm just saying the possibilities are endless, and we don't know. I think I kind of want to take a minute on the show today to admonish people who are going crazy in either direction right now. There are people saying, like, oh my God, Trump's finally going to get tried for treason or whatever. And it's like, look, there was the Mueller report.
Yeah, you've been waiting for this for a while.
Which came up, bagel, nothing, bubkiss. There was the Stormy Daniels stuff. The only person that ended up in prison there was Michael Avenatti himself for an unrelated charge. Yep. So there were things that people thought were going to get Trump in the past that didn't get him. This could be another one of those. Of course, this is unprecedented because his personal property was raided by the FBI. So maybe it seems more promising in some ways for people who are excited about that on the left. But then on the right, you have people saying this is the persecution of the president. And there's the meme going around of him sitting looking all serious. And he's like, they're not after me. They're after you. And I'm standing in the way. And people are very self-serious about Trump being this martyr. And I think it could help him potentially in 2024. But we don't know the impact that this could have because we don't know if he's going to be charged. We certainly don't know if he's going to be convicted. And yeah, like you said, we don't have that information. And I need to admonish the people. I think it is incredibly silly in that you gain nothing by jumping to conclusions in a situation like this. So I have some opinions and we're going to talk about it today, but I'm going to try to be very nuanced in how I discuss it because of the limited amount of information.
Yeah, I have this written out too. We don't know what's going on. We just don't know what's going on. And anything that anyone is saying is entirely speculative. And you'll notice all of these news stories of these unnamed sources, these former defense whatevers, these spooks they don't know either. And if they do, they're probably lying about it. Like, that's just the nature of this beast. And it's really, and there's another thing that's really is, and I'm going to use this term. I can't believe he's ruined this term because it's such a descriptive term. The Trump card here is we're talking about a former president. And so we can talk about the Espionage Act and whatever statutes and mishandling of documents, and all of those precedents, all of those norms are going to be applied to people who were not presidents. There are a whole slew of other issues that come into play when we talk about the person who has the power to declassify almost any document that exists in the executive branch, with the exception of very few. When we're talking about someone who has executive privilege, we're talking about someone who has attorney-client privilege, like all of us do when we have attorneys. But there's a whole slew of issues that make this incredibly complicated, above and beyond your average mistreatment, mishandling, lack of security for documents. It changes the whole calculus so much.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing to this that we had in recent history was the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email issues, I think, because the result of that, as I understand it, and she was the Secretary of State, she wasn't the president, but she was, it's a pretty high-ranking government official, and she was essentially confirmed to have committed perhaps an illegal act, but James Comey's conclusion was that she should not be prosecuted for it, that it just didn't make sense to actually go through with a full prosecution effort, but that he did basically admit that she had engaged in illegal handling of classified material on a private email server. I think she was like in Gmail. She was like,
Oh, it was worse than that. I actually, and I want to ask you about this at the end of this, but I actually was thinking about this parallel a lot. And I went to Comey's statement, and first of all, he's a law enforcement officer, so he can't press charges, but he took an unusual step in the face of, or in the context of unusual transparency, to give a law enforcement recommendation publicly to a prosecutor. And he said that the emails were stored on, quote, personal servers, not even supported by full-time security staff, and then went on, or even a commercial service like Gmail. So he's saying that her servers were even less secure than my Gmail account, which is ridiculous. And I thought the most damning part of this, and why I'm trying to figure out if there's any type of real true correspondence between this case and the Hillary case, is he wrote, "To be clear, this is not to suggest that in similar circumstances, a person who engaged in this activity would face no consequences. To the contrary, those individuals are often subject to security or administrative sanctions." And if you read Matt Taibbi on this, I pulled it out to have on camera, Edward Snowden's book. The way the Espionage Act is applied is extremely arbitrary on who gets actually investigated and prosecuted. So I'm sitting here, and all of the conservatives, the obvious parallel is the Hillary-Trump parallel, like in this particular situation. And I'm wondering if you think that is descriptive, informative, helpful way to think about this, or whether it's completely off. And the only big difference I see is there's a very different decision between what Comey said is, are we or are we not going to prosecute, or are we or are not going to recommend you be prosecuted, as opposed to the decision to file for a search warrant, which are two very different decisions. But to me, the parallels are not that incredibly off unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, so, the Clinton-Trump comparison is, I think, really close, and it is really interesting. The thing that I just keep thinking as it pertains to what we're going through right now with this raid and with this investigation is they have to be held to the same standard. Like, if it turns out that Trump did something that was kind of in the arena of what Hillary did, which was she didn't have a particularly nefarious purpose in having these classified materials, I think that ultimately, it didn't turn out that she was like selling state secrets or anything like that, but she had mishandled them. And at the end of the day, she wasn't charged, and she was in the middle of a political campaign at the time. And a matter of fact, I don't even know if she had secured the nomination. So certainly it could have changed the course of history had Comey not taken the unusual and extraordinary steps that he took to seemingly protect Clinton. So that is something that I've been thinking about, is at the very least, all I can say is there does need to be no double standard here, or else people are obviously going to become irate. And that kind of leads me into the conversation I wanted to have, which is there are so many different possible endings to this story. Like, it ranges from, on one side, you could have one of Trump's, you kind of brought this up before about the president could basically declassify almost anything they want. One of Trump's responses to this story has been to say that as president, I think his legal team said that as president, he made a directive that any documents he removed from the White House were automatically declassified. Now that sounds like bullshit. That sounds like a total cop-out. That sounds made up. But Trump ran a exceptionally dysfunctional White House by all accounts. Maybe that was something he actually said. I don't know. But it sounds like bullshit. It sounds like something you say in this situation when you're getting a little nervous and you're kind of like, all right, I got to come up with an excuse here. And you go like, oh, well, actually, everything I took out was automatically declassified. Like, it's really hard to take seriously.
It sounds like when your parents got a new car when you were as a kid and you jumped in the front seat the first time and went, forever shotgun. Yeah. Like, that's what it sounds like. It has
a very, like, playground feel to it where, like, actually, it's like you're playing some imaginary game with your friends and you're like, I have a shield that makes everything bounce off me and I can't be... It's like... It's just like, it just sounds like such a cop-out, such a BS. But look, maybe it's true. I mean, we've never heard anything about this directive until now. But to be fair to Trump and his legal team, there was never really any reason to like publicize this kind of directive in the past, I would think. As a matter of fact, they were probably incentivized not to make such a silly directive public. If it is really a directive that came out, now they're going to want to probably provide some evidence that this was a real directive he gave, if they have it. But so there's that element. So on one hand, I would say, I guess the best case scenario for Trump and for the right, if you think that Donald Trump is the person you want to have the mantle on the right, which I guess is debatable. But well, I want to get to that later too, in terms of what Ron DeSantis might think of all of this. But the best case scenario on that side is that it turns out that these documents maybe are not classified, or that maybe they are classified, but there's really no there, that there's just no smoking gun that implies that Trump was actually doing anything, again, particularly nefarious, and that essentially it falls into the same bucket as Clinton's issues from 6 years ago, which is that he mishandled documents, or they're not classified to begin with, but either way, he was not using them for a additional illegal purpose. That would mean that the narrative on the right that this was possible political persecution, that at its best, it was a fumbled investigation, that it was taking an unprecedented step for criminal activity that is just not unprecedented because Hillary Clinton did it not that long ago.
Right.
So that would be justifying, I think, some of the overreaction we may have seen on the right in recent days. And I call it overreaction because I think it's premature. It may end up being vindicated, as I just said. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, where those little they sound conspiratorial now, but maybe Trump was selling state secrets. Maybe he was using these for some kind of nefarious purpose. I don't know. I kind of doubt that he was selling state secrets. That seems a little bit cartoonishly evil even for Trump, but who knows? So the spectrum of possibility for how this, and look, and if that happens, the result is that this man cannot run for president. I mean, even if he's charged, I don't know how you can be on trial for a federal crime and run a presidential campaign at the same time. It wouldn't be the first time Trump has surprised me, but I don't think that is really logistically possible. To be like, oh, I got to be in court on Wednesday, but I'm actually going to Iowa for the caucuses on Tuesday. Like, I don't really think that's a thing you can do. So maybe Ron DeSantis is kind of rubbing his hands right now. Who knows? But the other thing is, this could benefit Trump greatly if it turns out that it doesn't really get the swing voters to abandon him, because it looks like persecution, because he doesn't get charged with a crime that goes beyond simple mishandling of documents. That's just not a sexy enough crime for the American people to give a shit about, frankly.
No, and so I can already hear in my head Trump stump speeching on a Monday, and then he's talking about how the corrupt Democrats are dragging me into court tomorrow to level lies against your beautiful president. Like, you can already hear how he's going to, take advantage of this.
He's going to joke about maybe I took it by accident. I put some papers over here. I put some papers over there. Who cares? Like,
yeah. Although, there's not necessarily illegitimacy to that kind of point, because you can see, I don't think Trump was packing boxes, right? I don't think he was going through and be like, I'll keep this, I don't want that. That seems like this. If anything, if this is just mishandling, it's gonna be some poor low-level staffer that ends up going to jail for this if they do. One thing I will mention is you had kind of touched on this classification, whether something's classified. And I can tell you, under the 3 statutes that are cited in the warrant, none of them have the term classification in them as far as I've read them. It's information respecting the national defense. In another statute, any record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing filed or deposited with any clerk or officer of any court of the United States. The classification, I don't think means that terribly much. I feel like I see these articles it was this level of classified. It was this level of classified. That's kind of an arbitrary designation. If you've heard the guy who does hardcore, Dan Carlin, does hardcore history and common sense, he's talked for years about how arbitrary the classification system is and whether things are classified and in what tier they're classified. So again, the Espionage Act, if you look, and I think I mentioned this before, I'll say it again, Matt Taibbi had a great article about this, talking about who's been targeted by the Espionage Act. Well, it's been Julian Assange. It's been Edward Snowden. It's been Reality Winner. It's been Daniel Ellsberg. It's not people who are giving information to foreign governments. It's mostly been people who have been given information to the press, which is a really interesting application. And again, you can find multiple sources talking about how arbitrary, usually this is low-level people who are easily targeted for prosecution under these types of statutes. And again, the Trump here is, he was president. This is very much different. Not Secretary of State, president. And that it changes the whole game a lot.
It is very dangerous waters that we're finding ourselves in, because again, the spectrum of possibility here runs all the way from this turning out to be just as much of a nothing burger as the Russiagate investigation and the Stormy Daniels stuff, or Trump could end up in jail if he was doing something particularly, and that is a disaster for this country. Whatever you think of Trump, people who listen to the show know I'm not a particularly big fan of Donald Trump. I don't want him in prison. And of course, look, if it turns out he's doing something highly felonious, it's hard for me to not say that would be justified. But the idea of everyone in this country who loves that man, and people do love that man, they sure do. He inspires a lot of loyalty in about 30 to 35% of the country. And like undying loyalty. Mm-hmm. And if he's in jail, we are in I wouldn't even call it a constitutional crisis. We're just in a civilizational crisis if the de facto leader of half the country is in jail. And that if that happens under an opposing administration. And that could happen. And look, there's like 12 different endings. It's like a video game that has like the good endings, the bad endings, and everything in between. It could be that maybe he did something highly felonious, goes to jail, and maybe people kind of understand it more. They don't get as upset because the information is out there. Like, look, if it was discovered tomorrow that Donald Trump murdered someone, no one would be upset. That if there was incontrovertible evidence that he murdered someone, he went to jail. Like, right. But I don't think that's not what he's under investigation for. At the end of the day, if he's put in jail for like mishandling a document, I would be furious just because that's such a stupid thing for us to do. And look, maybe he'll pay a fine. Maybe he won't be charged at all. We don't know.